to be joined by a man who's did the service and did it for his people. Congressman Mac Thornberry joins us here on the chat, and we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff as we wind down just a great career of service. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, David.
How have you been
Great.
doing?
I'm well, sir. Great to see you and everybody.
Yeah, back home.
Yeah,
Back had been a
absolutely.
while. Yeah. Now, Congressman, of course, you announced back in November that you weren't seeking another term. You came in as a freshman congressman in the Clinton administration, right?
Yep.
And
Right.
just have you just put a lot of work in. And one thing that stands out in my mind is why was it so important for you to be connected to your district? You came back, you'd hold town halls with insurance groups, businessmen, common people. We had things where you just came to town and invited reporters in. Why was it such an important thing to not just be in D.C. all the time?
Well, it really has to be about serving and giving back. I don't know if you know this, David, but my great grandfather fought for the Union
Yes,
in the Civil War,
I knew
and
that.
then he moved to Texas just outside Wichita Falls. And then my family have been ranchers here ever since. So I think about the incredible blessings that my family has received from this area, being in this area, and an opportunity to kind of give to be the spokesman for
Hmm.
those sorts
Right.
of values, to give back to them, but also to take what my family's benefited from and try to take it to Washington. I guess that's what made a difference. Now to do that, you got to listen.
Yeah.
I used to have a boss that said, "Good Lord gave you two ears and one mouth, and you ought to use them in that proportion." So listening to the people I work for back home before I went to Washington seems to me to be the way to do the job.
And you use that word quite frequently. The folks back home. I listen to my bosses back home. I've heard you say that a dozen times. That my bosses, referring to the people of the district.
Yeah, it was fun. We would, other than COVID, we'd have all these school groups and,
Yeah.
and kids come to Washington. I'd give them tours for the Capitol. One of the questions I always ask them is, who do you think my boss is? And sometimes they'd say the president
Hmm.
or the this or the other. And I said, no, you're my boss. I
Yeah.
work for you. And if I work for you, you got to pay attention to what I do.
Yeah.
And you got to tell me what you think
What you
about
mean?
what I do, just to try to put that sense of responsibility that goes with citizenship on them early.
In there early,
Yeah.
building that framework. Go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I really loved that comment there and the idea of representing the people, right? I mean, that's why we elect officials in the first place. And I'm really curious along those lines. You talk about taking that upbringing that you had to Congress, to Washington, D.C. How do we continue that when people are getting further and further separated in terms of rural and urban sectors of our communities?
Yeah, it's an enormous challenge, and I worry about it. It's been getting worse and worse. There are fewer and fewer people in the country who live in rural areas who much less earn their living from agriculture. And if you look at members of Congress, the number of people who actually have that personal background in agriculture is you could probably count them on both hands and not need all your fingers. So part of the answer is, like you and I. Uh, were last night. It's groups like Farm Bureau and others. We need to work smarter and work together, and that can help us be more effective. Another way that is remarkable and I think unique for our area is that going at least as far back as when Senator Teal Bivens was our state senator,
Right.
we tried to make sure we were one team from Austin to Washington and working with local mayors and so forth. Nobody's trying to hot dog or get above anybody else. It's working together. And Kel and Four
Hmm.
and John Smithy, Ken King from
Yeah.
up in the Panhandle, we have really committed to making sure we work together. And I think that can help us be more effective in rural areas when there are fewer and fewer of us too.
Well,
Congressman, let me ask you this, if I may. I know how hard it is once you're in Washington. It's hard to be impartial one way or the other. Once you go down to the press swamp there and meet everybody, it's kind of hard one way or the other. But I do know this. I want to know this. If you had to pick out one high point of your career, pinpoint it for me.
Oh, that's hard, Chuck.
A lot
I
of
think,
things.
I don't know, I wouldn't call this a high point. I would say probably the most memorable single day of my career was 9/11 because I was in the Pentagon having breakfast with the Secretary of Defense when the planes hit in New York and when they gave him the news and and evacuated out of the Capitol because they figured out the other plane was coming for the Capitol, et cetera. That's the most memorable day.
Okay.
Uh, but but there, as y'all have been talking all morning, there have been so many good, inspiring moments. Whether it's figuring out what or seeing what people in our area are doing, or walking through the village in Afghanistan with some outstanding young
Mhm.
soldier or
Yeah.
marine. I mean, that's the inspirational part of this job has really been the thing that's kept me going for a lot longer than I ever expected to.
Wow.
W-
Now, when today's politics, I know when Mac Thornberry is going to be on Fox or CNN or Face the Nation or any of those type shows, you always made it about the issue and your district.
Right.
We have something like the celebrity politicians on both sides of the aisle, and that's the one thing that I really admire about you because when you came on a national network, when you came on, it had to do with a policy armed service committee, whatever, or here. And speaking of armed services, you did a great job of bringing those jobs here to help out people, but you were also instrumental in helping out the airmen, the men and women of the Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, with the tools to live. Uh, Moving forward, what do you see armed services and the fate of our military looking like in the next 3 years? Because you've brought them back even since the last 3 years.
Yeah, we both Republicans and Democrats were part of cutting the military budget about 20% over the Obama years, and we brought that back about 10%. We were seeing more aircraft accidents, training accidents, all sorts of problems. And my bottom line was if we're going to ask men and women to go out, perform a mission for our country, they deserve to have the best equipment, the best training, the best support that our country can give them. And we weren't giving it to them. So we have come back a ways. David, I tell you, they are going to face more challenges than they have ever faced before. You see what Russia and China, North Korea just uh, trotted out a big new missile that can reach the United States. Iran, terrorists have not gone away. And when it comes to COVID, who do we turn to? We turn to the United States military
Mhm.
to get personal protective equipment out, to help with vaccines and so forth. Natural disasters, who do we turn to? So we rely more and more on the men and women of the military, and they are going to be asked to do more and more. I worry that Congress and President have spent so much money with COVID that the
Mhm.
temptation will be we got to cut, and that'll include the military. When you cut the military, then accidents go up.
Yeah.
They are not properly prepared for the missions, and
Right.
that is absolutely wrong. I hope that the folks coming after me can prevent that from happening.
That was a big thing when they were talking about redirecting funds from the armed services to the wall. You weren't happy with that. You were like,
No,
I don't want to see that.
no. Uh, 2 days ago, I was out at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls. They have five hangars that were built in the 1940s.
Mm.
And so I've been down to Fort Hood. I've seen the mold in the dorms and so forth. We had tremendous infrastructure needs here at Pantex.
Yes.
Fortunately, we've got a new office building that can help meet some of them. But the point is, that military construction money was needed. It was for a purpose. Now, I'm for building the wall, but it ought to be money directed for that purpose. You shouldn't take it away from the military to do it, in my opinion.
I agree. Shannon?
Congress,
Yeah, sure. You've said so many great things this morning and also last night at that Texas Farm Bureau meeting. I really appreciate Texas Farm Bureau for inviting me out and you out to speak to the community, really. You made a really great point last night, and I brought it up a little bit this morning in a conversation with David, is the idea of making political points with bills instead of, getting something done. I think that's one of the biggest contentions we have in this country right now, whether you're rural, urban, you name it, across the board. We're all a little worried about that. I even told you last night, Congressman, that it's a little scary, the idea of not having Mac Thornberry anymore for District 13. Because, we know who Mac is, we know what you stand for, we know that you're a friend to us, and you really do truly represent the people, like you've been talking about this morning. So, where do you see us going from here? How can we overcome that, that political divide to really get down to getting work done?
Yeah, well, you're kind. Thank you. Y'all, this morning, y'all have talked about two trends that do bother me.
Hmm.
One is this sense of notoriety, celebrity. I do have colleagues in Congress who care more about how many Twitter followers they have than how much legislation they pass. And what you're bringing up, Shannon, is increasingly, especially this year, the House under Speaker Pelosi has just voted on bill after bill that are messaging bills, not in any hopes of any of it's even going to be voted on by the Senate, much less passed, but just to make a point. And so you've got basically it's the same sort of thing, just to call attention to themselves or a person not getting things done for the people. On the other hand, whether you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, most people in the country just want to get stuff done. Even if you don't agree about exactly what it should be done, then figure out what you do agree on and do that much. And I think there's a common sense to Americans to solve problems that is not being represented in Washington, and that's part of the reason everybody, wherever you are politically, is pretty frustrated right
Let me ask you
Go ahead,
this,
Chuck.
Congressman. Just to your mind, in your mind, is there a formula that you can point to that actually helps to mediate across the aisle from one side to the other that's reasonably workable?
I don't think there's a magic formula, Chuck. I think it helps if you get to know your colleagues.
Right.
Uh, get to know them as real people and their kids and so forth. You may still disagree 90% of the time, but occasionally you're going to find those issues that you agree on and can work together. And I've found that in my experience. I guess the other thing I'd say is in politics, you get what you reward. So as long as voters reward the sort of celebrity and notoriety formula, they're going to get more of it. Uh, when people start rewarding a little more, passing bills, getting things done, making things a little better, then you'll get more of that too. And so I don't think it's a magic formula, but you really do get what you reward
Yeah.
when it comes to politics.
And great information there. And Congressman Thornberry has not had a problem working across the aisle. He
No.
did legislations with Democrats many a time.
Yeah, well, and I'll say, David, I've been lucky
Hmm.
because the working with the military and the Armed Services Committee is probably the most bipartisan thing that Congress still does today. Now, agriculture's been pretty bipartisan as well,
Yeah.
and so those two areas, I've been fortunate because that's where a lot of the thrust of my work has been. We for 59 straight years under majorities of both parties, presidents of both parties, 59 straight years, a defense authorization bill has been signed into law. And hopefully in December, it'll be number 60.
Right.
But my point is, I've been fortunate. If I were dealing with taxes or health care as my primary focus, then it would be a little harder to work.
Maybe all over the place there. Well, we're going to take a break. The Congressman